A Bigfoot hunter chose honor over hatred when he stood between a Lakota girl and 30 lashes meant for him. The whip scarred his back, but not his soul. And when dawn broke, her father arrived not with war paint, but with wedding beads. The leather bit deep into Sergeant Bigfoot Hunter's back for the 20th time, and he still hadn't made a sound. Blood ran in rivulets down his spine, pooling at the base of the whipping post, where his wrists were bound with rope that had long since turned crimson. Colonel Harrison stood 10 paces away, his face a mask of military precision, though something flickered in his eyes each time the whip cracked through the morning air. The entire garrison had been assembled to witness this punishment. 200 men standing in perfect formation while their fellow soldier paid the price for defending a savage, as the charges read. But Bigfoot Hunter knew better. He'd seen her eyes that night 3 days ago, wide with terror as Sergeant Murphy and his cronies cornered her outside the supply tent. Ayanna wasn't a savage. She was barely 16, a Lakota girl who came to trade beadwork for flour and sugar, keeping her people fed through another harsh winter. The 21st lash landed with a wet sound that made several soldiers flinch. Bigfoot Hunter bit down on the leather strap between his teeth, tasting blood and salt, and the bitter knowledge that he'd do it all again. Murphy had been drunk, his hands grabbing where they shouldn't, his voice slurred with whiskey and hatred as he called her things that made Bigfoot Hunter's stomach turn. When she tried to run, Murphy's friends had blocked her path, their laughter echoing off the wooden buildings like the calls of carrion birds. Bigfoot Hunter hadn't weighed the consequences. He'd simply moved, his fist connecting with Murphy's jaw with a crack that silenced the laughter instantly. The fight that followed had been brief and bloody, leaving Murphy unconscious in the dirt and Bigfoot Hunter facing court-martial for striking a superior officer. The post shuddered with each impact, and Bigfoot Hunter felt consciousness wavering at the edges like heat shimmer. Through the haze of pain, he remembered Ayanna's face as she knelt beside him after the fight, her small hands pressing a torn piece of her dress against the cut above his eye. She'd whispered something in Lakota, words he didn't understand but felt in his bones anyway. Gratitude maybe, or sorrow for what her rescue would cost him. When the military police had arrived to drag him away, she'd pressed something into his palm, a small carved eagle, smooth and warm from her touch. It was still in his cell, waiting for him if he survived the next 10 lashes. The crowd stirred as the 24th lash fell. Someone was approaching from the main gate. The sound of hooves unmistakable even through Bigfoot Hunter's pain-fogged hearing. Colonel Harrison raised his hand, and the whipping stopped mid-stroke. Bigfoot Hunter hung from his bonds, barely conscious, blood dripping steadily onto the packed earth. Through swollen eyes, he saw riders entering the compound. Lakota warriors, 3 of them, sitting their horses with the easy grace of men born to the saddle. The center rider was older, his hair streaked with silver, wearing a war shirt decorated with porcupine quills and bear claws. His face was weathered leather, lined with years of sun and sorrow, but his eyes were sharp as obsidian as they surveyed the scene before him. The soldiers' hands moved instinctively to their weapons, but Colonel Harrison's sharp command kept them at attention. This was Chief Iron Bear, Ayanna's father, a man who commanded respect even from his enemies. He'd ridden into an armed camp with only 2 warriors for company, which meant he'd come to talk, not fight. The chief's gaze found Bigfoot Hunter immediately, taking in the bloody back and the post stained red with suffering. For a moment, something passed across the older man's face, surprise perhaps, or recognition. Then his expression settled into the careful neutrality of a man conducting delicate negotiations. He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified, and walked toward Colonel Harrison with measured steps. The colonel met him halfway, the 2 leaders facing each other across years of mistrust and warfare. When Iron Bear spoke, his English was careful but clear, each word chosen with the precision of a man who understood that lives hung on language. "My daughter told me of the soldier who stood for her against his own people," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent compound. "She told me of his courage and his price." Bigfoot Hunter felt the words like a physical thing, warm and solid against his chest. Ayanna had spoken of him to her father, had told the story of that night in ways that mattered. Iron Bear's eyes moved to Bigfoot Hunter again, studying the young man who hung bleeding from the punishment post. 30 lashes is the sentence. Colonel Harrison nodded stiffly. 30 lashes for striking a superior officer. Military justice, Chief Iron Bear. Nothing personal. The chief's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Justice, he repeated as if tasting the word. White man's justice for defending a Lakota woman. This is interesting justice indeed. The tension in the compound ratcheted higher, every soldier waiting for the explosion that would turn words into bullets. But Iron Bear raised his hand in a gesture of peace, his voice remaining steady. 6 lashes remain. I ask that you wait. Give me this day to speak with my people, to think on what I have seen here. Harrison frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the delay, but something in the chief's manner gave him pause. Your daughter is safe, the colonel said carefully. She returned to your camp unharmed thanks to Sergeant Hunter's intervention. Iron Bear nodded slowly. She is safe in body, but in heart, in spirit, these things take longer to heal. He looked around the compound, at the assembled soldiers and their nervous faces, at the post where Bigfoot Hunter still hung barely conscious. My daughter speaks of honor among your people. She believes she has seen it in this young man's actions. I have come to see if she speaks truly. The words hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that made Harrison's jaw tighten. This wasn't just about punishment anymore. This was about something larger, more dangerous, the possibility of understanding between enemies. Iron Bear's words settled over the compound like morning mist, heavy with meaning that went far beyond the simple request for delay. Colonel Harrison found himself caught between military protocol and something he couldn't quite name, perhaps the recognition that this moment held possibilities beyond punishment and bloodshed. The chief stood with the patience of stone, his weathered hands folded calmly while his dark eyes never left Bigfoot Hunter's battered form. Behind him, his 2 warriors remained mounted and motionless, their faces masks of controlled alertness that spoke of men ready for anything but hoping for peace. The silence stretched until Harrison finally nodded, his voice gruff with reluctant respect. Sergeant Hunter will remain secured until tomorrow morning. The remaining lashes will be administered then unless... He left the sentence hanging, unsure himself what alternative he might be offering. Bigfoot Hunter barely registered the conversation through the haze of pain that clouded his thoughts. His back felt like liquid fire, each breath sending fresh waves of agony through his torn flesh. Blood had soaked through his uniform pants, and his wrists were raw from pulling against the ropes that held him upright. But somewhere in the fog of suffering, he heard Ayana's name spoken with a tenderness that cut through everything else. Iron Bear was talking about his daughter, about honor and courage, about choices that mattered more than military regulations. Bigfoot Hunter tried to lift his head, to show that he was still conscious, still present for whatever was unfolding around him. The effort sent sparks of darkness across his vision, but he managed to focus on the chief's face, seeing there something he hadn't expected, not gratitude exactly, but a kind of measuring respect that felt more valuable than gold. The chief stepped closer to the whipping post, close enough that only Bigfoot Hunter could hear when he spoke in low, careful English. My daughter sees your heart, young soldier. She speaks of eyes that hold no hatred, hands that protect instead of harm. He paused, studying Bigfoot Hunter's face. She asks many questions about the man who chose pain over silence. Bigfoot Hunter's throat was too dry for speech, but he managed a slight nod, the movement sending fresh fire down his spine. Iron Bear studied his face for a long moment, then reached into a leather pouch at his belt. He pulled out a small object wrapped in soft doeskin and held it where Bigfoot Hunter could see. Inside the wrapping was the carved eagle he'd given back to Ayana that night, but now it hung from a delicate string of blue and white beads that caught the morning light like captured sky. She made this for the man who stood between her and shame, Iron Bear said quietly. But she fears to give it, fears that soldiers do not accept gifts from Lakota women. She fears that honor might be punished twice. The words hit Bigfoot Hunter harder than any lash, filling him with an ache that had nothing to do with his physical wounds. Somewhere out there, Ayana was worrying about him, creating something beautiful with her own hands while he hung bleeding for choices they'd both made in a single moment of crisis. He tried to speak, managed only a hoarse whisper that barely qualified as sound. Iron Bear leaned closer, and Bigfoot Hunter forced the words past cracked lips. Tell her it was worth it. Every lash, every moment. She's worth everything. The chief's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise or approval or both. He straightened slowly, his gaze moving to Colonel Harrison, who had been watching the quiet exchange with growing unease. The tension in the compound was palpable now, every soldier sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that might change the careful balance of hatred and fear that kept this corner of the frontier from exploding into open warfare. Iron Bear walked back to where Harrison waited, his movements deliberate and dignified despite the weapons trained on him from every angle. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the assembled troops, ensuring that every man would remember his words. Colonel Harrison, you are a man of war, but also a man of honor. I have seen this in how you conduct yourself, how you treat prisoners, how you keep your word even when it costs you. Harrison's face remained impassive, but Bigfoot Hunter saw the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested the compliment had found its mark. Iron Bear continued, his tone formal but not unfriendly. My daughter has told me of the soldier who defended her honor at cost to his own body. She has told me of a man who chose justice over safety, who stood against his own people for the sake of what was right. These are not the actions of an enemy. These are the actions of a man whose heart walks in the light. The chief paused, letting the words sink in before delivering what everyone sensed was coming, the real reason for his presence here. In my culture, such actions create debts that must be honored. When a man risks everything to protect what is precious to a family, that family owes him consideration beyond mere gratitude. Harrison's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, but Iron Bear raised his own hand in a gesture of peace. I do not speak of violence, Colonel. I speak of something far more dangerous to both our peoples. I speak of understanding. The words sent a ripple through the assembled soldiers, a murmur of confusion and concern that Harrison quickly silenced with a sharp look. Iron Bear reached into another pouch and withdrew a leather bundle tied with sinew and decorated with small shells that clinked softly in the morning breeze. He held it carefully, reverently, like a man handling something sacred. This belonged to my father and his father before him. It has been passed down through 7 generations of chiefs, used only in matters of greatest importance to our people. Bigfoot Hunter watched through pain-hazed eyes as the chief unwrapped the bundle, revealing what appeared to be a ceremonial pipe carved from red stone and decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to flow like water across its surface. The sight of it drew audible gasps from some of the soldiers who recognized its significance. This was no mere artifact, but a symbol of authority and spiritual power among the Lakota. I offer to smoke the pipe of peace with the soldier who defended my daughter, Iron Bear announced, his voice ringing across the compound with the authority of generations. I offer to make him family, to bind his honor to ours through the ancient ways of my people. The implications hit the assembled crowd like a thunderbolt. Marriage. The chief was offering his daughter in marriage to Bigfoot Hunter, a union that would bridge 2 worlds that had known nothing but conflict for decades. Harrison's face went pale, then red, as he grappled with the enormous complications such an offer would create. Military regulations, government policies, the delicate balance of frontier politics, all of it threatened by an old man's gesture of respect for his daughter's protector. Bigfoot Hunter felt the world spinning around him, and not just from blood loss. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, he tried to process what he'd just heard. Marriage to Ayana, the girl whose eyes had haunted his dreams for 3 nights, whose gentle touch had been the last kindness he'd experienced before they dragged him to this post. The carved eagle with its blue and white beads seemed to burn against his memory where she'd pressed it, a promise of something he'd never dared imagine possible. But even as hope flared in his chest, practical considerations crashed down like an avalanche. He was a soldier in the United States Army, bound by regulations and oaths that forbade exactly this kind of alliance. Marriage to a Lakota woman would mean court-martial, discharge, exile from everything he'd known. Iron Bear seemed to read his thoughts, his weathered face softening with something that might have been paternal understanding. I know the cost, young soldier. I know what choosing my daughter would mean for your life among your own people. But I also know what choosing honor has already cost you. and I see that you do not regret the price." The chief's eyes moved to the blood-soaked post, then back to Bigfoot Hunter's battered face. "My daughter dreams of eyes that hold no hatred. She dreams of hands that protect instead of harm. She dreams of a man who would choose suffering over silence, who would risk everything for what is right. She dreams of you, Bigfoot Hunter." The use of his name sent shock through Bigfoot Hunter like lightning. He'd never told Ayanna his name, hadn't spoken to her at all during that brief, violent encounter 3 nights ago. But somehow she'd learned it, had asked questions, had spoken to her father about the soldier who'd stood between her and harm. Iron Bear smiled slightly, the first genuine expression of emotion he'd shown since arriving. She is young, but she sees clearly. She sees a man worth 30 lashes, worth the anger of his own people, worth the risk of everything he holds dear. And she asks her father to offer what our people have never offered to any soldier: a place in our family, a bond that cannot be broken by war or hatred or time. The silence that followed Iron Bear's offer stretched like a bowstring pulled to its breaking point. Bigfoot Hunter hung from the post, his mind reeling between the crushing weight of his wounds and the impossible possibility that had just been laid before him. Around the compound, 200 soldiers stood frozen in a moment that would define not just one man's fate, but potentially the relationship between peoples who had been locked in complex struggles for as long as anyone could remember. Colonel Harrison's internal struggle played across his weathered features like shadows dancing in firelight, duty warring with conscience, military protocol battling against the recognition that some moments transcend regulations and demand choices that come from the heart rather than the handbook. Iron Bear waited with the infinite patience of a man who had spent decades negotiating the survival of his people through words rather than weapons. The decorated pipe remained in his hands, its red stone surface gleaming in the morning sun like captured blood, a symbol of sacred promises that once made could never be unmade. From somewhere beyond the compound gates came the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving at speed toward the fort. Harrison's attention snapped toward the sound, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm as he considered the possibilities. The tension that had been building around the whipping post suddenly exploded outward to encompass the entire compound as soldiers moved into defensive positions. The gates swung open to admit a small cavalry patrol, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with urgency. The lieutenant in charge dismounted quickly, his eyes taking in the unprecedented scene before him. A Lakota chief standing peacefully among armed soldiers, a man hanging bloody from the whipping post, and an atmosphere charged with tension. He approached Colonel Harrison with the quick, nervous movements of a man bearing bad news. "Sir, we've got a situation developing 20 miles south. 3 separate wagon trains attacked in the last 2 days. Families scattered, livestock stolen. The territorial governor is demanding immediate action, and there's talk of assembling a punitive expedition against any Lakota found in the area." The words hit like physical blows, and Bigfoot Hunter saw Iron Bear's face tighten with the recognition that the delicate moment they had been building was about to be shattered by forces beyond their control. The old chief had come here in peace, offering marriage and kinship, but the wider world was calling for war. Iron Bear seemed to sense the shifting dynamics, his keen political instincts recognizing that the window of opportunity was closing rapidly. He stepped closer to Colonel Harrison, his voice dropping to a tone that carried the weight of urgency without sacrificing dignity. "Colonel, I know the pressures you face from your government, the demands for action against my people. But I also know that some of those attacks were not done by Lakota hands. There are others, renegades who would use this violence to destroy any chance of peace between our peoples." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, carrying implications that made Harrison's jaw clench with frustration. Iron Bear nodded, his expression showing that he understood the impossible position the colonel found himself in. "Then let us act quickly, before your responsibilities make choice impossible. Let me speak with the young soldier one more time. Let him decide his fate while decision is still possible." Bigfoot Hunter had been listening to the exchange through a haze of pain and growing desperation. The arrival of the patrol, the news of fresh attacks, all of it pointed toward the collapse of this fragile moment of possibility. But through it all, one thought burned clear in his mind. Ayanna had dreamed of him, had asked her father to offer marriage to a man she barely knew because she'd seen something in him that he hadn't even recognized in himself. Iron Bear approached Bigfoot Hunter with the measured steps of a man who understood that the next few moments would determine not just the fate of his daughter's heart, but potentially the future of peace between people standing on the edge of another bloody war. Bigfoot Hunter lifted his head with tremendous effort, his vision swimming from blood loss and exhaustion, but his eyes clear with the desperate intensity of a man who knew he was about to face the most important decision of his life. The chief stopped just close enough that their conversation would remain private. "Young soldier, I see death creeping at the edges of your eyes. These lashes have taken more from you than your commanders intended." His voice carried the gentle authority of a father speaking to a son. "But before the darkness takes you, I need you to hear something that my daughter asked me to tell you if this moment ever came." Bigfoot Hunter tried to nod, the movement sending fresh waves of agony down his spine, but his attention focused completely on Iron Bear's words. "She told me that in the 3 minutes you stood between her and those men, she saw the husband she had been praying for since she was old enough to understand what marriage meant." Iron Bear's voice grew softer, more intimate. "She said your eyes held no anger toward her people, only toward injustice. She said your hands were gentle when you helped her up from the dirt, respectful even in violence. She said you looked at her like she was a person worth protecting." Bigfoot Hunter felt something break open in his chest, a dam of emotion he hadn't even realized he'd been holding back since that night. The chief continued, his dark eyes never leaving Bigfoot Hunter's battered face. "But most importantly, she told me that when you smiled at her just before they dragged you away, she saw the man she wanted to grow old with. Not because you were strong enough to fight for her, but because you were brave enough to sacrifice everything for a stranger's dignity." The words hit Bigfoot Hunter like physical blows, but instead of pain, they brought a warmth that seemed to push back against the cold that was creeping into his limbs. "Bigfoot Hunter," the chief said, using his full name with the formal gravity of a man about to offer something sacred. "My daughter has asked me to bring you an offer that has never been extended to any soldier in the history of our people. She wishes to know if you would consider leaving your soldier's life to become her husband, to join our family, not as a captive or a curiosity, but as a son and a warrior worthy of respect." Bigfoot Hunter closed his eyes, feeling tears mix with the blood and sweat on his cheeks as he grappled with the impossible choice being laid before him. Everything he had ever known, everyone he had ever been, would disappear if he accepted Ayana's offer. What would happen to her if I said no?" Bigfoot Hunter whispered. The chief's expression grew grave. "She would accept it as she accepts all things that cannot be changed. She would marry someone from our own people eventually, have children, live a good life. But she would always wonder about the soldier who chose honor over safety, who showed her that love can exist even between enemies." The image of Ayana spending her life wondering, what if, was almost unbearable to contemplate. "Chief Iron Bear," Bigfoot Hunter managed to say, his voice growing stronger. "Your daughter, Ayana, she saved my soul that night just as surely as I tried to protect her body. I've been thinking about her every moment since they dragged me away, wondering if I'd ever see her again, if she understood why I had to act." He paused, gathering strength for what might be the most important words he would ever speak. "I've been in love with her since the moment she pressed that carved eagle into my hand, even though I barely know her name or the sound of her voice. I've been dreaming of a life I never thought possible with a woman who saw something in me that I'm still trying to understand." The chief's stern features softened into something approaching a smile. "Then you accept? You will leave your soldier's life to become my daughter's husband, my son." Before Bigfoot Hunter could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment once again. This time, however, the riders were a small group of Lakota women, their horses decorated with ribbons and their clothing adorned with fine beadwork that marked them as members of a chief's family. At the center of the group rode a young woman whose beauty struck Bigfoot Hunter like a physical blow, even through his pain and exhaustion. Ayana sat her horse with easy grace, her long black hair braided with blue and white beads that matched the decoration on the carved eagle she had given him. Her eyes found his immediately across the compound, and in that gaze Bigfoot Hunter saw everything he needed to know about his future. Ayana's arrival transformed the compound's atmosphere from tense military standoff to something that felt almost mystical. She dismounted with fluid grace despite the formal riding dress she wore, a stunning creation of soft buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the afternoon light. Colonel Harrison watched the developing scene with the expression of a man who had completely lost control of his command. The arrival of Lakota women at his fort was unprecedented enough, but their obvious ceremonial dress suggested that this was no casual visit. Ayana stopped just close enough to Bigfoot Hunter that she could see the extent of his injuries, her face showing the controlled composure of a woman who had been preparing herself for this moment. But her eyes betrayed the depth of her emotion, pain at seeing him suffer, gratitude that he had survived, and something else that Bigfoot Hunter recognized as the same love that had been growing in his own heart. When she spoke, her English was careful but clear, each word chosen with precision. "I asked my father to wait, to let me see you before you gave your answer. I needed to look in your eyes again, to be certain that what I saw that night was real." Bigfoot Hunter tried to straighten against the post, to show her that despite the blood and pain, he was still the man who had stood between her and harm. The effort sent fresh agony through his torn back, but he managed to meet her gaze directly. "Ayana," he whispered, her name feeling like a prayer on his lips. "I've been dreaming of you every moment since they dragged me away. Dreaming of your hands, your eyes, the way you saw something in me that I didn't even know was there." His voice grew stronger. "I've been wondering if I'd ever see you again, if I'd ever get the chance to tell you that 3 minutes changed everything about who I am and who I want to become." The young woman stepped closer, close enough that she could have reached out and touched his face if propriety had allowed. Instead, she reached into a beaded pouch and withdrew the carved eagle, now hanging from an elaborate necklace of blue and white beads interwoven with small silver bells that chimed softly. "I have carried this with me every day since that night," she said quietly. "Not just the bird, but the memory of hands that protected instead of harmed, eyes that held no hatred, a heart brave enough to choose suffering over silence." She held the necklace where he could see it clearly, the carved eagle seeming to dance in the shifting light as the silver bells created a gentle music that somehow made the harsh military setting feel transformed into something sacred. "Among my people," Ayana continued, "when a woman wishes to show that a man has captured her heart, she creates something beautiful with her own hands and offers it as a symbol of her feelings. This necklace represents 60 hours of work, every bead chosen and placed with thoughts of you, every stitch made while I prayed that you would survive long enough to receive it." The revelation that she had spent so many hours creating something specifically for him moved Bigfoot Hunter to tears that had nothing to do with physical pain. Through the haze of blood loss and exhaustion, he saw with perfect clarity what his life could become, not the lonely existence of a career soldier, but a life of love and purpose with a woman who understood the deepest parts of his character. "Ayana," he said, putting everything he felt into her name. I accept your father's offer, the chance to become part of your family and your people. I choose love over duty, heart over habit, you over everything I've ever known." Iron Bear's stern features broke into the first genuine smile Bigfoot Hunter had seen from him. He stepped forward with the ceremonial pipe, unwrapping it with movements that spoke of rituals performed countless times across generations. "Then it is settled," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the compound. "Bigfoot Hunter, you will be cut down from this post not as a punished soldier, but as a man about to join a new family through marriage to my daughter." Colonel Harrison found himself caught between military duty and human decency. Protocol demanded that he refuse to allow such an arrangement, that he complete Bigfoot Hunter's punishment and maintain the strict separation between his soldiers and the local tribes. But something in the dignity of Iron Bear's proposal, in the obvious love between Bigfoot Hunter and Ayana, made him reluctant to destroy what was clearly a moment of profound significance. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man making a decision that would define the rest of his career. "Sergeant Hunter, if you accept this offer, you understand that it means the end of your military service. You'll be discharged immediately, no benefits, no pension, no claim to any support from the United States government." Bigfoot Hunter nodded as firmly as his condition allowed, his eyes never leaving Ayana's. "I understand, sir, and I accept those consequences gladly." Harrison studied him for a long moment, then turned to his sergeant. "Sergeant Williams, cut Sergeant Hunter down from that post. His punishment is complete, and his service to the United States Army is hereby terminated by his own choice." The sergeant moved quickly to comply, his knife sawing through the ropes. As Bigfoot Hunter collapsed to his knees, Ayanna was there immediately, her gentle hand supporting him as his strength finally gave out completely. The touch of her skin against his was electric, confirming everything he had hoped and dreamed about their connection. She whispered something in Lakota, words he didn't understand but felt in his bones anyway, then switched to English. "I have dreamed of this moment," she said softly. "Dreamed of the day when the brave soldier would become my husband, when two peoples could be joined by love instead of divided by hatred." Iron Bear knelt beside them, the ceremonial pipe cradled in his weathered hands. "This pipe has blessed the marriages of 7 generations of my family," he explained. "Today it will bless something new, a union that bridges 2 worlds, creating bonds that no government can break and no war can destroy." He offered the pipe to Bigfoot Hunter first, guiding his trembling hands as he took the ritual puffs that would seal his commitment to Ayanna and her people. As the sacred smoke rose into the afternoon sky, Bigfoot Hunter felt something fundamental shift in his soul. The man who had been dragged to the whipping post as Sergeant Bigfoot Hunter was gone, replaced by someone new, a husband, a son, a bridge between worlds that had known only conflict for too long. Ayanna took her turn with the pipe, her eyes shining with tears of joy as she completed the ritual that made them officially married in the eyes of her people. The silver bells on her necklace chimed softly in the breeze, creating music that seemed to celebrate not just their union, but the possibility that love might indeed prove stronger than hatred. The compound erupted in a mixture of cheers and confused murmurs as soldiers tried to process what they had just witnessed, while Iron Bear's warriors began a traditional song of celebration that echoed off the wooden buildings like a promise of better days to come. 3 months had passed since the ceremony that bound Bigfoot Hunter to a world he was still learning to understand. The Lakota camp stretched along the banks of the Powder River like a living thing, teepees arranged in careful patterns that spoke of traditions older than memory. Bigfoot Hunter sat cross-legged outside the lodge he now shared with Ayanna, his hands working slowly at intricate beadwork she was teaching him, each stitch a meditation on how completely his life had changed. The scars on his back had healed into raised lines that told their own story, but the man who bore them was no longer the soldier who had taken 30 lashes for a stranger's honor. He was Wickhopy Waist, Good Star, the name Iron Bear had given him during the adoption ceremony that made him truly part of the people. Ayanna emerged from their lodge carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deer hide, her movements careful and deliberate in a way that had become familiar over the past weeks. Bigfoot Hunter looked up from his beadwork, his heart catching as he saw the gentle curve of her belly beneath her dress, the unmistakable signs of the life they had created together. She settled beside him with graceful motion, her dark eyes bright with the secret joy they had been sharing for weeks now. When she unwrapped the bundle, Bigfoot Hunter saw that she had been working on tiny moccasins, each one decorated with the same blue and white pattern that had adorned the carved eagle necklace she still wore every day. "Child will need strong feet for the journey ahead," she said softly, her English now peppered with Lakota words that Bigfoot Hunter was slowly learning to understand. The baby was due in the depth of winter, when the tribe would be settled in their protected valley. Bigfoot Hunter reached out to touch one of the tiny moccasins, marveling at the delicate craftsmanship and the love that had gone into every stitch. In his former life, children had been an abstract concept. Now, with Ayanna's hand resting on his arm and their unborn child growing between them, the future felt both terrifyingly real and impossibly precious. The sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful afternoon quiet, and Bigfoot Hunter looked up to see a familiar figure riding into camp. Colonel Harrison sat his horse with military precision, but his face showed none of the stern authority that had once defined their relationship. Instead, he looked like a man carrying news he wished he didn't have to deliver. Harrison dismounted and approached their lodge, his weathered features showing strain. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had been fighting battles on multiple fronts. "Bigfoot Hunter, I need to speak with you. There have been developments that affect your situation and possibly your safety." The formal tone couldn't hide the genuine concern in the colonel's eyes, and Bigfoot Hunter felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching autumn weather. Iron Bear joined them, settling into the circle with easy dignity, and Harrison continued his explanation with careful precision. The federal investigator I mentioned has completed his review of frontier operations. His report questions the wisdom of allowing personal relationships to develop between military personnel and tribal members. Bigfoot Hunter felt Ayana's hand tighten on his arm, her understanding of politics sharp enough to recognize the threat hidden in Harrison's words. The colonel's jaw tightened as he delivered the rest of his news. There's pressure from Washington to regularize the situation. Some officials are suggesting that your marriage should be declared invalid under federal law, that you should be brought back into military custody as a deserter who was unduly influenced by enemy agents. The words hung in the air like poison, threatening to destroy everything Bigfoot Hunter and Ayana had built together. Iron Bear's expression remained carefully neutral, but Bigfoot Hunter could see the anger burning in his dark eyes. Bigfoot Hunter felt rage building in his chest, the same protective fury that had driven him to stand between Ayana and harm 3 months ago. But before he could speak, his wife's gentle voice cut through the tension. They would take my husband from me because they cannot accept that love can exist between our peoples, she said quietly, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly where their child grew. They would call our marriage invalid because it proves that their hatred is not the only choice. Harrison's face showed the internal struggle of a man caught between duty and conscience. I won't let that happen, he said finally, his voice carrying authority. Your marriage was witnessed by federal officers, conducted according to the religious customs of a sovereign people, and consummated with the full knowledge and consent of both parties. Any attempt to declare it invalid would require overturning legal precedents that go back to the founding of this country. The colonel's unexpected support brought tears to Bigfoot Hunter's eyes, but he could see that Harrison wasn't finished with his news. The older man's expression grew even more grave as he continued. However, there is another complication. The territorial governor has issued what amounts to an ultimatum: either you return to military custody voluntarily, or bounty hunters will be authorized to bring you back by force. The charge would be desertion in time of war, which carries serious consequences. The euphemism couldn't hide the reality that Bigfoot Hunter was potentially facing execution, that his choice to follow his heart instead of military regulations had painted a target on his back that would never fully disappear. Iron Bear spoke for the first time since Harrison's arrival, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had spent decades protecting his people from governmental overreach. And what of my daughter? What of the child she carries? Are they to be considered legitimate spoils of this white man's justice? Or will they be cast aside as inconvenient complications? The chief's words cut straight to the heart of the matter, highlighting the human cost of political decisions made by men who would never face the consequences of their choices. Harrison's face showed genuine pain as he grappled with questions that had no good answers. I don't know, he admitted, his military bearing cracking under the weight of moral complexity. The law is unclear about the status of children born to such unions. There are precedents that could be interpreted multiple ways, depending on the political needs of whoever is making the decisions. The uncertainty was almost worse than a definitive threat, leaving Bigfoot Hunter and Ayana to imagine dozens of possible futures, none of them offering the simple happiness they had found in each other's arms. As if summoned by the gravity of the conversation, other members of the tribe began to gather around their lodge. Warriors who had initially been skeptical of the outsider in their midst now stood ready to defend him as family. Women who had taught Ayana the songs and stories of their people now offered the same wisdom to the child she carried, regardless of its mixed heritage. Children who had learned to see Bigfoot Hunter not as an enemy but as an uncle who told fascinating stories about the world beyond their valley now played at his feet, their laughter a reminder that love could indeed transcend the artificial boundaries that adults insisted on drawing. Bigfoot Hunter looked around at the faces surrounding him, his wife, his father-in-law, his adopted people, and the military commander who had become an unlikely ally, and felt the weight of decisions settling on his shoulders once again. 3 months ago, he had chosen love over duty, heart over regulation, hope over fear. Now he was being asked to make that choice again, with even higher stakes and even less certainty about the outcome. But as Ayana's hand found his, as their unborn child moved beneath her touch, as the silver bells on her necklace chimed softly in the evening breeze, Bigfoot Hunter knew that some choices, once made with a full heart, could never be unmade. The carved eagle that had started it all seemed to dance in the firelight, a symbol of love that had already survived 30 lashes, military regulations, and the prejudices of 3 worlds. Whatever came next, whatever price they would be asked to pay for choosing each other, Bigfoot Hunter and Ayana would face it together, their bond stronger than any law and their love deeper than any hatred the world could throw against them. Iron Bear stood slowly, his weathered face set with the determination that had made him a respected leader among his people. "Colonel Harrison," he said with formal dignity, "you have shown honor in warning us of this danger. But you must understand, my son-in-law will not be surrendered to men who would destroy him for choosing love over hatred. The Lakota do not abandon family, no matter what governments demand." The old chief's words carried the unmistakable weight of a man prepared to fight if necessary, and Harrison recognized the impossible position he found himself in. As a military officer, he should be demanding Bigfoot Hunter's immediate surrender. As a man who had witnessed the profound love between husband and wife, who had seen the dignity with which Iron Bear conducted himself, he found such demands impossible to voice. "Chief Iron Bear," Harrison said carefully, "I came here not as an enemy, but as someone who has come to respect both your family and the man who chose to join it. But the forces gathering against you are larger than any one fort, any one colonel can influence. There are federal marshals being organized, bounty hunters being licensed, military expeditions being planned. The machinery of government has been set in motion, and it will be very difficult to stop." Ayana's hand moved protectively to her belly, her dark eyes reflecting the fear that all 3 men could see building in the situation. The child growing within her would be born into a world that might never accept its very existence, caught between cultures that seemed determined to remain at war. Bigfoot Hunter struggled to his feet, his healing wounds still tender but his voice strong with conviction. "Then we disappear," he said simply, looking around at the faces of the people who had become his family. "We go north, beyond the reach of territorial governors and federal marshals. We find a place where our child can grow up free from the hatred that divides our peoples." Iron Bear nodded slowly, his strategic mind already working through the possibilities. "There are places in the northern territories, beyond the white man's maps, where my people have hunted for generations. Valleys hidden in the mountains where a small band could live in peace, raising children who know only love instead of war." The plan was dangerous, requiring them to abandon the relative safety of the established camp for the unknown perils of the wilderness. But as Bigfoot Hunter looked at his wife's face, saw the hope beginning to replace fear in her eyes, he knew that any risk was preferable to waiting passively for their enemies to destroy everything they had built together. Harrison stood as well, his military posture somehow different now, less formal, more human. "If you're planning to disappear," he said quietly, "you'll need supplies, provisions for the journey. And you'll need to move soon, before the search parties arrive." The offer of assistance from a serving U.S. Army colonel was so unprecedented that for a moment no one spoke. Then Iron Bear inclined his head in a gesture of profound respect. "You would risk your own position to help us?" the chief asked, his voice carrying genuine surprise at this unexpected generosity. Harrison's smile was tired but genuine. "I've spent 30 years on this frontier, Chief Iron Bear. I've seen enough hatred and violence to last several lifetimes. If I can do one thing to help love triumph over fear, to see a family stay together instead of being torn apart by politics and prejudice, then perhaps some good can come from all these years of conflict." As the sun began to set over the camp, painting the teepees in shades of gold and crimson, the 4 of them began to plan an escape that would take Bigfoot Hunter and Ayana far from the reach of those who would destroy their happiness. The carved eagle with its blue and white beads caught the firelight, seeming to approve of their courage in choosing love over safety, hope over despair. Their child would be born free, raised in a place where the artificial divisions of race and culture meant nothing compared to the eternal truths of family, love, and the courage to protect what mattered most. The story of Bigfoot Hunter and Ayanna would become legend among the Lakota, passed down through generations as proof that even in the darkest times, even when the whole world seemed determined to keep people apart, love could find a way to build bridges across any divide. Their marriage had survived 30 lashes, military court-martial, and the anger of 2 governments. Now it would survive exile itself, creating a legacy of hope that would inspire countless others to choose courage over fear, love over hatred, and the future over the bitter divisions of the past.